Welcome to the subscribers edition of the video. Everyone's welcome here. I am Education Fellow at the Alliance for Lifetime Income, protectedincome.org. What ends up happening is they commission a study. It's called PRIP, and then we have the findings. And you can understand why I'm sitting here and happy to join this group that is very consistent with everything that I've stated over here. This is jo.com, by the way, my private personal website, where I'm talking about the fact that money doesn't care about your philosophy and the fact that, money has issues, right? What I think about my work. And now you can see it here. Money's complicated, big naming problems. One of those locations is annuities. Okay, meaning that the information, the knowledge of consumers, as well as advisors, financial guidance counselors, if you will, a lot is not known. Because of the lack of knowledge, it opens the door to mudball slinging. You can find it, just click online, Google, I hate annuities. Out will come lots and lots of comments. The reality is that there are elements of truth in the criticisms. It doesn't get away from the function of an annuity. Annuity is there to create a stream of lifetime income, period. The amounts can be a measure or it can be the topic of debate, right? There are tons of different types of annuities. Right, so it's kind of like, oh, I hate annuities. Okay, well, what kind? Point here, money has big naming problems. The Alliance for Lifetime Income is trying to demystify the language of annuities and try to crystallize back to the function of annuities. And it commissions these studies because this dovetails very well with what consumers, people, everyday people of different net worths are concerned about when they're thinking about retirement matters. And that's what this PRIP 2025 is. More people turning 65 these 2 years than any time in U.S. history. And then you can see it here that the first chapter has been released. So what we have here is this is the research itself. And here I'm going to take you through it just real briefly here, or relatively briefly. Stunning findings. Okay, this isn't that stunning to me, so now you understand this is going to be a filtered version for subscribers. Everybody wants the attention, and this is a group that does a very good job. It is public facing. Stunning findings about peak 65. Persistent inflation, volatility, and growing fears about Social Security, saying they're considering delaying it altogether. I'm not surprised about this, first of all, right? Not a lot of these findings to followers of Jay's Corner, whether it be the free or paid subscriber set, is really going to be shocked. If you followed my message, if you followed the newsletter, then these findings are going to make just complete common sense. Common sense, right? We don't need to split atoms here. You can easily connect dots because I've drawn the dots kind of close together. So I've talked about inflation, volatility, and growing fear. 1/3 of Americans considering delaying it altogether. So you're talking about spending money in retirement outliving their savings. No problem. These are largely known. So this is what it is. Cool graphic. Retirement reset, etc., etc. And so what I'm doing now is, that's the survey, and I'm going to actually give you a look at what's inside, and here it is. So what ends up happening is this gets released to the press. Okay. And of course, as Education Fellow at the Alliance, I, of course, have access to it. So here it is, and you're going to see, a bunch of different social media with graphics and things like that. I'm just going to go right to it and give you my thought on what these graphics actually are saying, what parts I would emphasize, what parts I would de-emphasize. This I'm not surprised about, because when uncertainty rises, and knowledge is lacking, that combination creates a problem, right? I mean, if just markets up or down, Social Security, yeah, that's not new, right? But when combined with the fact that people don't understand how all the pieces fit, what those components are, how to fit them together, how to layer them, how to time them, now the combination of these two facts, of course, it makes sense. And now you can understand my part at the Alliance, right? Which is that one of the main locations that people don't understand what goes in here is healthcare cost planning. And that number is huge. Huge. You already know it, right? You look at the title page of Jay's Corner, online, it becomes immediately evident that for me, the reason here is here, right? You're uncertain about the way that healthcare cost works. You also don't know enough in general. So now, if we had a system that was completely stable at very, very high prices, and you knew it's okay because this is going to persist, right? There's a government involved, there's systematic healthcare cost increases. These are known. It's not wildly changing, meaning it's not that, okay, one day it's X and the other day it's 5X. In other words, the system is complicated, inherently complicated. You know this already. The issue is that so little is known about this that it creates the uncertainty that can delay decision making. That should not be a surprise. This doesn't, the stunning thing for me, is that healthcare cost planning and uncertainty is creating the issue. Yeah, Social Security is creating the issue. And market volatility, those are income, right? That's your income base. The reality is people don't spend gross income in retirement. They spend net income in retirement. And that means that you need to subtract expenses. And expense 1A is healthcare cost in total. And then its uncertainty is also enormous. Let's continue. Outliving their savings in retirement. 54%, this is too black and white for me, right? You could have $2 million and you could spend $10,000 a year, like very, very little. You could live in a location where there's maybe one traffic light. You have $2 million. You live 7 hours away from any metropolitan area. Guess what? You're still going to be fearful. There are degrees of fear. To me, this is not granular enough. Just to say, I'm afraid, I'm not afraid. We live in a polar world. 2/3 at financial advisors change our retirement over to address concerns about volatility, inflation, rising interest rates. Okay. Fine. I would basically say one thing is that Tina is gone. There's a reason that Jay's Corner, one of the slogans is stocks for show, bonds for dough. Why? Stocks for show, bonds for dough, here is the issue. It has to do with volatility, inflation, and interest rates. Why? When the denominator starts moving around, then all of the other things have to be paid attention to. We've come from a world where the denominator, interest rates, was a one-way train, coordinated central bank in one direction, lower. That is no longer the case. Again, this should not be a surprise. Okay. Increasing annuities. 50% of financial advisors are putting more clients into annuities, which ranks as the most popular change. I don't know. My head is down, right? The Alliance has done a very good job of basically as a affiliated group. We're not answering to any carrier, right? We're not a subsection of Nationwide or Northwestern Mutual, Prudential, Allianz, right? And the education part, right, is valuable and true and of the highest quality. My colleagues there are literally the cream of the crop when it comes to different aspects of financial and retirement planning. That's just indisputably the case, right? The names I would tell you, Michael Finke, David Blanchett, the headliners at the Alliance, the ones who are in the press many more times than I, is indisputably the head of the class. The idea that it's wrong is just, I spend zero time thinking, okay, this is like academically wrong. Zero time. Annuities versus the stock market. If they inherited $100,000 today, 64% of consumers said they would put in money into an annuity versus 36% into the stock market. This is a pretty interesting finding. And for me, this is the most interesting finding here. Why? Why do I think this is interesting? The reason I think it's interesting is that irrespective of where you are, you have this flexibility now. If your money is in an IRA, you can put portion into an annuity inside your IRA. If you have it in a individual brokerage account, a joint brokerage account that has already been taxed, you can use tax loss harvesting to carve out the allocation into an annuity today. So it's interesting that somebody posed it like, okay, I got a windfall and I found a $100,000 check underneath my bed. A real story by John McEnroe, where it was, I think, $1 million. Anyway, that if it's the case that you would have done it in that instance, why aren't we doing it now? That's the follow-up question I would have wanted to ask the public here, unasked. And in most things, right, we've got headlines which are like the stunning things, but it is the follow-up question here that would give some very specific information. From the beginning, right? I said at the beginning that, hey, people don't know enough. There's a knowledge crisis. Well, one of those, here's another, for me, an example of that, which is, they can't answer my follow-up question because they're unaware of how to do it and that they could do it now. And the idea, and you can see now the slight contradictions here. Why isn't the advisor telling them? Because if this is true, that 64% of, Acme Wealth Management's clients would allocate $100,000 if they got an extra $100,000. So let's just say they had $500,000, they got an extra $100,000. 64% would put a 16% allocation into annuity today. Why isn't it 16% today? Three takeaways. So yes, if you don't have a plan, make one. Somebody's writing a second book about this. The very first sentence in the first chapter, the name is, you need a plan. So this is not that, controversial. I'm going to end it there because we're going to have some of this other segment here because it has to have a Social Security claiming strategy. I'm going to get to that now. This is the Bipartisan Policy Center. This is a PDF. I'm going to have the link for you for sure. You don't have to write this down. The link and the PDF will be saved for subscribers on GH2 Benefits under the premium subscriber information. So you can see it here. Point being here is that this contributor to the author is Jason Fichtner, who happens to be the executive director of the Alliance for Lifetime Income. So if you've never heard of Washington University in St. Louis, that's fine. But he's also at Stanford University, as well as he was the ex-chief economist at Social Security Administration. This is a non-political group, nonpartisan. And what they're basically saying, you can see the title of this, Hedging the Risk of a Longer Than Expected Life. The Value of Social Security Bridge Strategy. So I'm not going to ignore bridge strategy. What you have is, this is the point of delaying Social Security. This is the point. You're hedging the risk of living longer than your expectation. There are two outcomes, right? When people say, okay, you don't know how long you're going to live. Number one, you have an expectation, right? And you can live one of two things, shorter than the expectation or longer than the expectation. And that's it. So under this scenario, you've lived shorter than expectation. You got hit by a drunk driver while picking up the mail. Let's say that happened. The uncertainty about retirement isn't only about the income, it's about the expenses. Under this situation, your expenses after being hit and killed instantly by a drunk driver are zero. You lived to 15 years longer than you expected. You're paying expenses for 15 more years. This is the fear of running out of money, right? Existing one where this is just part of the way the structure of it works is Social Security, right? It's basically for people who are new, people who are not considering retirement tomorrow, right? Delaying Social Security means higher amounts adjusted for inflation, and that if you're the spouse, that the higher amount remains if your spouse predeceases you. Even in the worst case, you're talking about minus 23%, 28%. Even in that situation, the fact is, the haircut you're taking by claiming early will be more than the haircut due to the fact that Social Security benefits would be cut. And it doesn't make up for the fact that, oh yeah, by the way, I'm down by 28%, but if I had waited, I'd gotten that 28% back, plus I'm living for 15 years longer. And most of the things, this is the ivory tower here, right? It's correct. In practical reality, this is the issue. And the simple explanation I would give to you is that, okay, you have a 30-year mortgage to your house. You get to the 29th year, and all of a sudden, you get a tap on the shoulder, you get a call from your bank and said, guess what? Your mortgage has been extended to 45 years at the same payment. You would freak out, right? You've been presuming that you're on the hook for X years. You're now on the hook for X plus 15 years. That's what happens when you live longer than expected. How do you hedge this? Social Security. And that's why I do like this way of calling it, right? You're hedging the risk of longer than expected life. Those other two factors that I mentioned to you are still also true, right? Because it's not only the hedging due to the length, it's due to the fact that you get at least some kicker due to inflation. And with a third aspect, which is that let's just say you were the spouse and your partner, your spouse, earned much more than you did, right? Then you want that higher earner to keep waiting as long as possible. Because the base case strategy for the person who's on Medicaid, making it check to check, is simply to work as long as you can. The reason is so that you can delay Social Security for extra periods of time so that when you do have to stop work, the amount is higher and then that amount gets increased due to inflation, right? So 3% on 104 is bigger than 3% on 100. You can understand my point. When you wait, you get a higher amount. Let's continue here, and I will get down to this here because it's talking about the 4M's financial risk in retirement. Because I think that this is very well stated here in this paper. Key findings. Yes, that's true. We're going to get to that. So you can see it here. This is a very nice table of way of showing it to someone. Right? But you can see here that I don't think that they've done well here. Yeah, I think that they've not done well here. Okay, the 4M's. Mortality. Right? In other words, right. Longevity risk. For me, this is risk number one. And we go back to the mortgage. Right? You don't have to pay expenses for 30 years. You've got to pay it for 45 years because your mortgage has been instantly extended. Morbidity, risk of experiencing adverse health outcomes. Financial risk to older Americans. No question. Crazy people write books, go on all sorts of podcasts, create newsletters to tell people about this. In order to do what? To drive the cost down as much as you can. To do what? To optimize net income. That's all. Market performance. This one you cannot control. Right? You don't have to worry about any of the other M's. Because the reality is one unit, whatever a unit is, one unit can turn into 100 units. Right? Just the S&P 500 is not going to be the efficient way. It isn't, right? There are lots of fancy instruments where one can turn into 100. You need to have a crystal ball, by the way. This is weird to Jay. And the reason it's weird to me is that we spend so much time and energy about these. That we have no say and no influence and no inside information about your specific situation here. But yet we use all of our energy here, which to me is just exactly backwards, right? You want to get down to here? No problem. Tell me you've nailed these two items and erased them. That you have the maximum amount of preparedness on these two. Then you want to go down here? No problem. Why? You don't control the market. Macroeconomic conditions. We are living in a planet where we have almost 400 million Americans, right? Congratulations, right? We, there are, what, 4 times more Indians, 4 times more Chinese. So macroeconomic conditions. So while the US is still the biggest economy, right? 1.4 billion Indians, median age is under 30. You give me poor, smart, and hungry, and 4 times more of them, you should be worried. And my point isn't that the outcome is like in stone. My point here is that we just don't control it, right? There's going to be things that are going to happen. Other people are out there in more explicit terms. I'm not a Chicken Little. Right? Art Dalio left the largest hedge fund, which he founded, right? Listen to his messages at some point, right? What he's saying is not wrong. But you can see what ends up happening is that given the immense uncertainty, risk to conservatively spend significantly less than because they want to preserve their assets in case of longer expected life. I think that this is true. They're part of this. They're, like I said, the headliners here. No problem. Part of that, to me, also is the fact of uncertainty over healthcare costs. And it's not only due to the fact they're going to have to pay healthcare costs for longer. It's that they don't know enough how to put a cap on what healthcare costs might be, because they don't understand how health insurance works to put that cap on. Delaying reduces the need for non-Social Security income, right? You slow the withdrawal from your IRA. You slow the withdrawal from your brokerage, individual brokerage accounts, your savings account, right? You can see it here. You've got monthly benefit unmet need. You're trying to fill in these yellow bars here, right? And when you do that, you are slowing the withdrawal rate, the conversion rate. I'm going to start calling it conversion rate more frequently because conversion rate to usable cash. Okay. Fitting all of these to make sure you're on the same page as your expectations. To make sure to close this knowledge gap that I stated with. So I'm giving you a good base, a lifelong base. One from which, the things you don't control, the market, for example, market outcomes. I've already stated, right? We've had stocks for show, bonds for dough. Why is there uncertainty about market? Because the higher volatility is due to the fact that interest rates were coordinated in one direction. That ceases. And even with markets higher as the result, the fact is that volatile base still persists.